She had 2 jobs and a spreadsheet. Every Sunday night, she would sit down and move numbers around: what was owed, what was coming in, what could be shifted or deferred. She was meticulous about it. She did not buy things she did not need. She cooked at home. She tracked everything. And she was still, 10 years later, more or less where she started. The people who knew her could not explain it. She was not careless. She was not irresponsible. The thing they kept reaching for was effort, that she had not tried hard enough or smart enough or in the right direction. It had to be something about her, because the alternative was harder to say out loud. That the system she was running the spreadsheet inside of was designed to keep the result exactly where it was. This is not a comfortable idea. It is also not a new one. And once you understand the actual mechanics of how poverty perpetuates itself, not the moral story but the cognitive and structural reality, the spreadsheet starts to make a different kind of sense. There is a version of this conversation most people have heard. Poor people stay poor because of bad decisions come from bad values come from bad culture. It is satisfying if you have never been inside it, because it locates the cause inside the person and makes the problem, in principle, individually fixable. It is also mostly wrong. Not entirely wrong. Individual decisions matter. Behavior has consequences. Agency is real. But the explanation that begins and ends with individual character is missing the most important part of what actually perpetuates poverty. And missing it means that the solutions it generates do not work. Start with scarcity itself. In 2013, researchers Sendil Mullainathan and Eldar Shaffer published findings from a decade of research on scarcity. Not poverty specifically, but the cognitive effects of having less than you feel you need. Their finding was specific and important. Scarcity captures the mind. When you are facing a shortage of money, of time, of food, of any resource that matters, your cognitive bandwidth narrows. The brain tunnels on the immediate problem. This tunneling is not a character flaw. It is an adaptive response. When resources are scarce, focusing on the immediate shortage is the functionally correct thing to do. Solving the acute problem, the bill due this week, the payment that will cause the account to overdraft, the gap that needs to be closed right now, is the correct priority when the alternative is not solving it. But tunneling has a tax. The cognitive bandwidth devoted to the immediate crisis is bandwidth that is not available for everything else. Long-term planning suffers. The quality of decisions in domains outside the immediate scarcity declines. The ability to resist short-term temptations, to exercise patience, to forego something now for something better later is diminished. This is not stupidity. It is the predictable result of operating under resource pressure. And it creates a specific dynamic. The same cognitive conditions that are produced by scarcity make it harder to escape scarcity. The crisis of the present consumes the attention and the capacity that would be needed to change the future. Mullainathan and Shaffer tested this in a study that became famous. They asked people to perform IQ-style tests, the same people. The only variable was whether the participants were primed to think about a financial worry beforehand. For people who were financially comfortable, the worry made little difference. For people who were financially stressed, the effect was significant. Cognitive performance dropped measurably. Not because they became less intelligent, because the financial problem was already consuming bandwidth that the test was also competing for. The mind under scarcity is not the same mind as the mind without it. And the decisions made under scarcity are not the same decisions that would be made with more room. There is a second mechanism that is less about cognition and more about structure. Being poor is expensive. This is the paradox that is invisible from the outside and obvious from the inside. Because you cannot afford to buy in bulk, you pay more per unit. Because you do not have a car, the low-cost grocery store across town is inaccessible and the expensive convenience store nearby is what you have. Because you do not have a bank account or cannot maintain the minimum balance without fees, you pay check cashing fees and money order fees and the markup of payday lending. Because you cannot make the security deposit, you pay the more expensive apartment that does not require one. Because you cannot afford the preventive care, you pay for the emergency room visit. At every point, the cheaper option requires an upfront investment that is not available. And the inability to make that upfront investment generates a stream of ongoing costs that is structurally more expensive than the alternative. The poor pay a poverty premium that the not poor do not see and cannot imagine, because the not poor have always been able to buy in bulk, have always had the deposit, have always been able to choose the option that costs more now to cost less later. There is a number that circulates in research on this topic. Economist James Shields estimated the poverty premium for a low-income family in the United States at roughly $500 to $1,000 a year in financial products and services alone. That is before the higher food costs, the higher insurance costs, the higher transportation costs of not having reliable access to cheaper options. The total adds up to a significant fraction of income being consumed simply by the structural costs of being poor, money that is not available for savings, for investment, for the upfront costs that would unlock the cheaper tier. The spreadsheet cannot fix this. Not because the person running it isn't trying. Because the math in the spreadsheet is operating on inputs that are already rigged against the outcome. There is a third mechanism, and it is the one that is hardest to discuss honestly. Poverty is intergenerational, in part because of what it transmits, not through genetics, through environment, through the specific things that are present and absent in a household defined by scarcity. Present, chronic stress, which produces cortisol, which over years affects cognitive development, impulse control, and the capacity for long-term thinking. Present, housing instability, which disrupts schooling, which disrupts skill development, which affects labor market outcomes for decades. Present, a social network composed entirely of other people who are also poor, not because poor people are less worthy of connection, but because networks are generally income stratified, and the information, opportunities, and capital that flow through networks flow more readily through wealthy ones. Absent, the inheritance that does not have to be a large inheritance, can be a few $1,000s at the right moment, a co-signer for an apartment, a relative who knows someone hiring, a safety net that allows risk-taking, the confidence that comes from knowing that failure is not catastrophic because someone would help. This last absence is the one that is hardest to see from outside. The presence of a safety net does not only protect against failure. It changes what you are willing to attempt. Research on entrepreneurship, on career risk-taking, on educational investment consistently shows that people with family safety nets take more risk, and risk-taking over a life tends to produce more opportunity. The net is not just insurance. It is permission. When the net does not exist, the rational response is caution. Risk that might be appropriate for someone with a family backstop is genuinely dangerous for someone without one. The caution is not timidity. It is accuracy about the actual consequences of failure. There is a fourth mechanism that operates quietly underneath the others, and it is the one that the person in the middle of it is least likely to be able to see. It is the way that chronic financial stress reshapes the relationship to time. When you are financially precarious, the future is not a planning horizon. It is a threat. Planning for 5 years from now is a luxury of people who are confident enough about the next 5 months to think that far ahead. When you are not confident about the next 5 months, when the emergency that will derail everything might already be on its way, the rational response is to focus on the near term, to prioritize survival over strategy, to optimize for now because now is what is at stake. This is not short-sightedness. It is appropriate calibration to the actual environment. But it produces decisions that, from outside, look like imprudence. Spending on something enjoyable now rather than saving for something distant. Choosing the job that pays more immediately over the one that offers better long-term prospects. Decisions that make perfect sense inside the actual time horizon, and look wrong from the outside because the outside is applying a different time horizon. The person who cannot think long-term because the short-term is precarious is not failing to plan. They are planning. They are planning for the emergency that is statistically likely in their world, while the advice to plan longer is predicated on a level of stability that is not in their world. None of this means nothing can change. Individual action matters. The person who builds financial literacy, who finds a way to contribute even small amounts to savings, who navigates the specific traps of scarcity with awareness, that person is more likely to build momentum than the person who does not. The individual mechanisms are real, but the individual action is happening inside a structural context that either supports it or actively counteracts it. And pretending the structural context does not exist is not a neutral error. It produces policies and attitudes and cultural assumptions that blame the person for the conditions the system created and resist the structural changes that would actually move the needle. The question, why do poor people stay poor, has a complicated answer. Part individual, part structural, part cognitive, part historical. The comfortable answer, the one that is really a non-answer dressed up in the language of personal responsibility, gets to feel righteous without being useful. The more useful question is what actually breaks the pattern. The research is clearer on this than most people expect. Early childhood investment in the specific kind of stability that allows cognitive development to proceed without the disruption of chronic stress. Access to financial products that do not charge a poverty premium. Health coverage that makes preventive care accessible. Educational environments that compensate for the cognitive deficits of early stress. Specific, targeted cash transfers at the moments, and there are identifiable moments when a small amount of capital could prevent a downward spiral. Cash transfers, specifically, have accumulated an unusually strong evidence base. Studies across countries and income levels consistently show that giving people money, directly without conditions, produces improvements not just in financial outcomes but in cognitive function, mental health, and children's educational attainment. The people receiving the money are not, on average, spending it on things they should not. They are spending it on what the behavioral economics research on scarcity would predict. The upfront investments that unlock the cheaper tier, the buffer that allows the time horizon to extend, the stability that allows the mind to function at full capacity. The intervention works because it addresses the root, not the choices, the conditions. She is still running the spreadsheet. The numbers still don't quite add up. Not because she is doing it wrong, because the numbers in the spreadsheet reflect a world where being poor costs more, where the mind under pressure performs differently, where the safety net that would allow real risk-taking was never there to begin with. She knows all of this in her own way without the research language. She has lived the mechanisms. She knows the spreadsheet is not the problem and not the solution. She does it anyway because what else do you do? Because you do what is in front of you. Understanding the system does not free you from it immediately, but it changes what you blame. And what you blame determines what you try to fix. And what you try to fix, whether it is the individual or the conditions, is the difference between policies and attitudes that perpetuate the problem and ones that have a chance of actually changing it. Scarcity captures the mind. That is not a character flaw. That is physics. And the person running the spreadsheet at midnight on a Sunday is not failing. They are doing something quite difficult in conditions most people never encounter, with fewer resources than they need, and they are still trying. That is worth seeing clearly.